much to the chairperson for the invitation, and thank you for having me. This morning has been incredibly eye-opening. I think a lot of what has been presented here are things that perhaps you are aware of, but actually it left me with a greater sense of feeling as though, well, you're not alone. There are people in the country who are thinking about this crisis in very similar ways and who understand the urgency of what we are facing. And so in as much as some of the statistics here this morning were presented were harrowing, but it gave me a sense of hope that there are foot soldiers along the way that are going to help us with what we need to do. So thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, and to everybody who is present in the room, and to the panelists. So I've decided to ditch my keynote, and perhaps yes, much to my team's disappointment. I've decided to ditch it for a couple of reasons. One, because I think perhaps what's important, instead of hearing me talk from my prepared speech, let's have an honest conversation, shall we? About where we are. I mean, the two ladies have given us some great statistics to back up what I'm going to tell you. And then to perhaps what it will do is that it will then foreground what I think are some of the solutions that we need to be focusing on. And then, of course, at the end, I'm going to have a call to action for the people in the room. So allow me to ditch my keynote and let me just have a very honest conversation with you about where we are. So a lot has been said about pearls, and of course, the biggest irony here is that the pearls results came out when I was sitting in the opposition benches. And so this was one of the things that I used to drive, very hard from the opposition benches, asking government, difficult questions. And now I'm in government. So now I've got to ask myself these difficult questions about where we are going. So when I was sworn in, one of the things that I decided to do was quickly get a very good understanding of the system from the department, from stakeholders, get a really good understanding of what is happening, because I'm no education expert. And so I did a lot of this listening, and eventually within about 2 weeks, because the GNU had taken some time to establish, we were now very much behind with the statutory obligations that Parliament had set to table budgets. So very quickly, I had to, wrap my head around what are going to be your priorities, what are you going to prioritize in this 300 billion rand fiscal envelope. And I have decided to simplify things significantly. And here is the reason why. There's a lot going on in my department, and there's some people who are doing amazing things. But in the context of tough fiscal conditions, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we going to prioritize? But more than that, in the context where we are not performing well, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we going to prioritize? And so there are two main priorities that can be teased out that I have decided to pursue in the next 5 years. That is improving literacy rates in the country and dealing with infrastructure and keeping learners safe in schools. Because I believe the two are interlinked. If you are feeling unsafe and you are unsafe in schools and the educators are unsafe, they are unable to perform as well as they should. But my biggest obsession as I wake up every single day is how do we make sure that we move from the bottom of the bottom rung in the world to moving up and following some of the success stories that other countries have done. It's not insurmountable, but it requires clear dedication and also just understanding what the cause is. And so those are the two priorities. And let me focus on literacy as the reason why this is so important to me. if you are in the top 20 wealthier schools in South Africa, you are likely going to go to a prep school at the age of 3. You will likely encounter books, toys that are able to help you with cognitive development. You are likely to spend 3 years in ECD before you get to grade R, and then by the time you get to grade 1, you are able to already read and read for meaning. And likely, if you are in the top 20% of schools that are wealthy, your parents have a different understanding of a reading culture. You are probably reading at home. You are probably being read to at home. But if you are from Umkanduli or Qwaqwa or Kwamdingi, where I come from in the Eastern Cape, chances are you will not encounter or hold a book with things in it for you to read and have an understanding until you are 7 years old. But even then, the school that you're going to is not at the level as, a private school. You are likely not going to have the 220 days of teaching time, 7 hours a day. That is likely going to be interrupted. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that we are currently we are in a system where, in a deeply unequal country, where we are running two parallels for young learners. 30 years into our democracy, there's one set of learners who are going to go on to be active participants in the world, in active participants in our economy, and there's a majority of mostly poor black learners who are going to be locked out of economic opportunities in perpetuity. And that, for me, is the thing that I obsess about. Because if I leave behind the 11 million learners who are solely dependent, they have no other option, who are solely dependent on the public education system, what that means is that we are locking an entire generation of learners into perpetual poverty. And that should scare us all, especially when we are saying we are 30 years into our democracy. Because people like me should not be an exception. While I grew up in a village, my single grandmother, who was a teacher, bankrupted herself just so that I could go to a former Model C school. It shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. Learners should be able to access quality education regardless of where they come from. And so, what are some of the reasons have been traversed here? What are some of the blockages that we're experiencing? Number one is the reading culture in our communities. I was never read to as a child. My mother was too tired from driving 70 kilometers to a rural school to go and teach, and then try and rush back to my school where she had to go and attend teacher-parent conferences. She was tired by the time we got to home. So I was never read to. But it was more than just that. It was a culture, right? It was never a culture that was inculcated in how we grew up. I look at my friends who have children now. There's bedtime stories every single day. The kids read back to their parents. All of these things, it's a small culture. It may seem insignificant, but a culture is very, very, very important because this is where kids are coming from. So there's a culture, there isn't a culture of reading in our country. It requires mobilizing communities, parents, SGBs, schools to be able to say, how do we start to talk about reading as a culture? Nwabisa, I think it is, spoke about even enjoyment of reading. If you are behind the way that she explained, even if there is a culture of reading, I'm not wanting to read because it is not something that I can enjoy. And so we require to build a culture of reading. The second thing is mother tongue-based bilingual education. There was a stat here again that was presented, how English and Afrikaans speaking children do significantly better in schools than those who speak African languages. And the reason for that is, yes, one may say it's skewed towards the fact that they are likely to be in better equipped schools. But actually, what we've seen is that the reason for that is because You are going into school for the first time in grade 1. You are taught how to speak English for only 3 years. Remember, you've spent 7 years at home. Speaking is Xhosa, speaking is Tswana, and now all of a sudden, at the age of 7, you are required to learn this language. And then when you are just about learning the language in grade 4, you are told, now we need to learn science through the very language that you are still learning. So if we look at the statistics, we may be slightly stable in the foundation phase, but we see the first drop where we lose learners is in grade 4, when they start learning content subjects. And you know what's scary for me the most is the fact that, one, those kids never catch up. Number two, we lose them. That is scary for me. So it's one thing that we can't have kids catching up, but the mere fact that when they start to fail, some of these kids don't go back to school. That is scary because, what is the prospect? What are your prospects as a young learner who only has a grade 4 in future? What are your future prospects? So when kids start to fail along the system, that's when we worry and that is why I will talk to now about wanting to de-emphasize the obsession with matric results and talk about the system and the health of the system along the way. Because if we look at the throughput, which is what the learners we get in grade R and all the way to grade 12, we realize we've lost learners along the way. When I asked the department, where do we lose learners? They show me, here we lose learners in grade 12, in grade 4. We lose learners somewhere in grade 6 and 7. Then we lose learners when they get to high school, so grade 8 and grade 9. And then we lose a lot of learners between grade 10 and 11 because they're not going to sit for an exam they know they're going to fail. So they're going to leave. And once they leave, they're lost to you in the system entirely. So then the kids that start grade R, we then celebrate the 900,000 kids who are writing matric, which I take nothing away from these learners. But I'm saying as a country, we need to obsess less about how many people are able to pass matric and obsess about how many kids are able to start from grade R and finish, and whether or not we are able to keep them learning and at pace between grade R and grade 12. So that then brings me to maybe let me leave the most unpopular one for last. Then the introduction of the ECD, universalization of ECD in grade R. Great move. And unfortunately, and again, as I say that I'm starting to learn a lot about how being in opposition was much easier than being in government. There was a lot of politicization of the Bella Bill during the election, much to the system's detriment, actually. I've had to have this conversation with my own party and say, please shut up. I need the rollout of grade R soon, okay? And I don't need this stuck in litigation. So only about 50% of schools in the country have grade R, and a lot of it is simply not well equipped. So we need the universalization of grade R, but also I welcome the move to move ECD into the Department of Basic Education. Because currently in South Africa, the ECD system is just a daycare center where there's no learning, where there's no reading. Kids are literally left with auntie from the community to look after. We haven't gotten into that space and said, how do we set the curricula for ECD? And at the moment, only 197 million rand is given to the ECD because we haven't really formalized the incorporation of ECD. The president and the department, the Minister of Finance, assure me that once we start picking up, that we will see more redirecting of funds in that space. It's important because, as I said when I started, that if you look at kids who are in more affluent areas and how quickly and how soon they start learning, it's important that we do that for kids in Gwarube too, right? But it's a mammoth task. It's a monster because you've got to formalize it. You've got to register the ECDs. You've got to make sure you've got teachers in there. You've got to make sure that you've got practitioners who are registered, who know what you've got to set the curriculum. But it's a task that I'm up to, because I think it's important. Because then again, the obsession, we have to obsess about the system and not just simply looking at the easy wins here and there. And then the last thing, which was talked about extensively here, is assessing and systemic assessment. And this will likely make me possibly the most unpopular Minister of Basic Education, I don't know, maybe since '94. But having done away with systemic testing means that we are driving blind. We don't know what we don't know. We're just seeing statistics along the way to say, well, we're losing kids. We don't know why. And we don't know where they are. How then, this is the reason why now we are simply obsessing on the end product and not along the system. Because it's convenient to do so. What is not convenient to do so is to ask ourselves, where are our learners in grade 3? Where are they in grade 6? Where are they in grade 9? So it's not a surprise when they get to grade 12, where we're not just simply saying, oh, I hope we manage to get over 80%. When the DG said to me, oh, I hope we manage to sustain, I'm like, that's not the point. The point I need you to understand is that I need learners, all 13.5 million of them, to stay in school and to be at the level of what the global trends are showing us. That's what's important. And so, yes, I will celebrate with the matric class of 2024, but I am more obsessed about making sure that the learners who start will finish, and that we are competing at a global scale, so that when learners are able to leave school with a quality product, when they say I've completed matric, we've doubled the throughput. We are not at the bottom of Pearls and other international benchmarks, and that when they leave, they are proud of the product that they leave with. But central to that is taking our teachers along with us. I think there's been an unhelpful culture in South Africa where when you talk about teacher training and capacitation, it is viewed and it is often perceived as though you are using a stick more than a supporting mechanism. It has to be about support. It's not about punishing teachers. I'm not saying we must punish teachers. I'm saying that teachers need to be supported. And part of supporting is making sure that they have a conducive working environment, that they're not using pit toilets themselves, that they're not being gunned down at their schools, that the department or that the SAPS makes sure that we look after our schools as centers of safety so that people can do the job that they're meant to do. And so lastly, what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to focus on the system in its entirety. And I am going to require the help of not just the people in this room, but also the people in the cabinet, the other departments, because a lot of what is not our core business converges here. Whether it is safety, whether it's water and sanitation, whether it's infrastructure problems, where we see kids swimming in rivers just to get to school, all of those things are converging right here. Whether it's scholar transport. In this 5-6 weeks I've been a minister, I've had to go and look at parents in the eye and say, I'm so sorry for your loss of your 6-year-old child. So yes, the system is dogged by many things, but one of the things that I want to really drive in cabinet is to say, well, it's all our problem. Somebody talked about political will here. It's all our problem. If we say it and we view it as a national crisis, then each and everyone in that cabinet room needs to understand that it is our problem. And they need to show up. Because if we don't show up, then we are on a highway to nowhere. Because then we are leaving an entire generation behind, and it will come back to bite us. So that is going to be my approach, but here's my call to action. In the next coming year, I'm going to be doing some pretty painful things around looking at some of the efficacy and the impact of some of the department's programs so that we can look at how we reprioritize money to go towards the priorities that we need to prioritize. We are also going to be having some tough conversations as a country about returning to things like testing in the system. But it's going to require voices, influential voices, to support some of these calls because there will be tough headwinds. I've already had people saying, if you dare go in that direction, we will revolt, right? But if we're going to have to put the learner at the center of all that we do, we have to make some tough decisions. And so thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the studies that you are working. This is really some quality product. Dr. Mlambo Ngcuka, I was looking at the book that I was given. It's a quality product. And as I said, in as much as there were statistics that were presented here that were rough to look at and that really sort of painted a picture of a really big crisis, but it helped to know that I'm not alone and that there are people who are thinking about these things critically. There are people who are wanting to be part of the solution. And so my call to action really is to say, strength to your arm. I will be reaching out to stakeholders like yourselves as we go through the journey of turning things around. I'm pretty sure of all the success stories that have been listed here, that none of these things were easy. Some of them were unpopular, some of them were hard, some of them didn't work, but we have to undertake this thing as an entire country and have an entire country approach of saying, how do we fix our crisis? Because for me, one of the things that when I leave in this portfolio and I leave and I go and retire in my home, in my retirement home in the wilderness, I wish to see the Department of Education not just being a social portfolio, being actually in the economic cluster, because that's where it belongs. Because if you get this right, that's how you're going to solve your economic problems. Because you are then creating a pipeline of skilled people who are going to contribute to your economy, who are going to fill the skills gap. And that's how the orientation, that's how we need to relook at how we look at education and how we need to think about education. And so I'm going to leave it there. And I don't know, Chair, if there are questions that people would like to pose. Thank you.
Clapping the greeting back. Molweni. That's right, that's right, that's right. We're still in the morning. I think we've all had breakfast. Maybe we could sit, no? Just for comfort. I'm going to help with the Q&A, is why I'm up here. Igama lam nguNoncedo. I'm part of the reading panel, and I've met the majority of the folks here, I think before, where we've joined each other, different reading panels, to try and figure out the status of things in our provinces, nationally, and think collectively about things that we could do in our own contexts. No? So it's great to have everyone here. This is the first time we've had a media gathering like this, but I think everyone understands why. No? We've gone through quite a riveting national election. We've reconstituted the way we work inside government. There's an opportunity here, and we needed to gather to try and figure out what that gives us. Because the thing is that today, when we met in February and today, we're all about to make history together. And we've invited the minister to join us on that journey. So, the invitation, are you feeling that? Yeah. The invitation for a Q&A. I'd like us to engage the keynote from the minister with any questions, any reflections, any comments. One of the things that stuck out at me, noted, sir, I probably will start with the woman in the room, but I've got you. One of the things I was thinking about is where we're working as HODs or head of departments, when we think about the first layer of losing learners at grade 4, how does that show up inside of our own work? Is that clear in the context of our rural provinces in particular? What other parts of our departments are affected with the fiscal consolidations, maybe, that make it difficult to think about the literacy space? Zithini izinto where you're sitting. I think it's an opportunity to share through a reflection or a comment, even or a question. So can I please invite for some hands?
Point of order. You didn't introduce yourself as non-NATO from Equal Education.
Yeah. Me, okay. Okay, order. My name is, I'm from Equal Education, but I'm part of the reading panel. Mm-hmm. That's important. I saw HOD yesterday. I said, I've already written you an email about issues. That's why I didn't introduce. So, okay, any hands, please? Papa, Mama, Eva, nice girls. Okay. So I think Will you introduce yourself, ne? And then we'll get to it.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. My name is Tabile Ntombela from University of Zululand. Mine is not a question, but just a comment. Thank you, Minister, for your impromptu presentation. But what excited me in your talk is that you are tying together issues of school safety, infrastructure, and I hope you will be looking at class sizes as well, because that also has a huge bearing on how teachers are able to manage classes. But the issue of reading cannot actually flourish unless schools are safe, as you rightfully pointed out. Last week we had a school safety conference in the province, and the things that were shared were really frightening, the things that happen in schools. So if you can pay attention to that, it would really assist for teachers to feel they are valued, their lives matter, and the learners' lives matter. But I just want to thank you for seeing the connection between all these things instead of focusing on just one thing, what happens in class when the school is not fenced, when the pit toilets are a problem and all of that. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Good morning, Minister. I'm your neighbor from the Eastern Cape, from Rhodes University.
Oh,
Rita
hello.
Rosenberg.
Rodents, a lot of rodents here, eh?
Absolutely. Very proudly so. Minister, I really warmed to the point you made about the importance of time on teaching. You were saying that in the rural schools, you're not going to get those 220 days of teaching time, 7 hours in a day. And the research has shown us that that's probably one of the most important factors, is the time actually being taught. Now, as I also warmed to your point of let's introduce more continuous assessment. How do we make sure that we don't pull the teacher away from teaching to be filling in assessment forms and sending it up the line? I don't have an answer to that one, but I feel that it's very important that we get that right. We need to be a bit innovative, because sometimes we spend so much time reporting that we actually lose time teaching.
Should have been eradicated a long time ago. We now need to move the conversation to class sizes. We now need to move the conversation to schools that are not being maintained. We need to move the conversation to, making sure that, there are no inappropriate structures in schools. I cannot still be talking about pit toilets in 2024. So when we talk about safety at schools, it's all of those things encompassed in that. But also, this is where I was saying what is going to be very important for me is the collaboration with other cabinet colleagues. The issue around safety at schools is something that it should be, the Minister of Police should also concern himself with. And, provincial commissioners should concern themselves with those things. Because, when I was told about a teacher that was gunned down in front of learners at a school in KZN, I mean, those are the things that should not happen. We all saw and watched in horror when panga-wielding people with machine guns walked into a school and kidnapped 2 children. I mean, yes, the school was fenced and whatnot in Katlehong, but they were still able to bully their way through. And while you don't want to create compounds in schools where there's, guns and the lot, but there needs to be a community awareness that schools are our asset, that even us as parents and community, even if I don't have a child in that school, that these are our assets. These are the things, the places where our kids go and unlock their futures. Therefore, when we see vandalism, we must report it. But we must be able to pick up the phone and get a policeman on the other side. Do you see what I'm saying? How these things are all interlinked. So I agree with you that the issue around safety in schools, but class sizes also are directly linked to how well teachers are able to teach. And I mean, in my provincial visits, as I'm going to embark on them in this month and next month, those are some of the things that I want to understand. The other thing is just very quickly that I've realized in the sector is the accuracy of data. So when I ask people, tell me where are we in terms of, eradicating improper infrastructure. The problem becomes is that even the provincial departments of education sometimes don't have a good understanding of what's out there themselves. So the accuracy of data and the integrity of the data is that we receive becomes important, because if I ask the department where are the class sizes problems, I get a generic understanding. But if we are going to have a targeted approach of fixing those things, we need to know, here are the schools where we've got overcrowding. This is what we're going to do about it. There are so many, the Department of Infrastructure is saying, we are ready to assist you. We've got we've got entities that are linked to this department. We've got a footprint in the provinces. Where do you need us? But if we ourselves don't know the extent of the problem, we can't direct the solutions. Then the issue around time on teaching, that is very, very important. And I agree with you around assessments and not taking the teachers away from, having them to feel arduous forms upon forms. But I have to say that one of the things, again, which is slightly unpopular, is accountability. We've got to introduce a culture of accountability in our schools. And time on teaching is incredibly important. We've got to guard jealously against that. When I met with the trade unions earlier, a couple of weeks ago, I indicated to them that, we will work together very well, but they need to help me guard against teachers who are not in school during school time doing union work. That cannot be the case, because if we're putting the learner at the center of what we do, then we've got to make sure that we guard jealously that 7 hours. Already we are saying, Umama was saying that kids are sharing a textbook. So you know that it's highly unlikely that that child is going to go home and go and catch up on the work that they were meant to do that day. It means once they leave school, that's it. And so they are constantly falling behind. And so we've got to make sure that there's accountability, that teachers understand that 7 hours is a non-negotiable time that you've got to spend in school and in classes. And when we're talking about assessment, we've got to find a way of how to do it outside of schooling time. That it cannot be that the teacher is sitting there making sure that they're filling in work. We've got to design a system that where we're doing assessments that are not affecting schooling time. Umam Litwaba talks about resources, grandparents, particularly who are illiterate. The resources is an important conversation, because workbooks are great and they're excellent, but we are not at the level at which we should be. But part of the things that I want to do is to fix the basics. And fixing the basics is making sure that we get teaching time right, making sure that kids are in school, making sure that they are not attacked or drowning in pit toilets, getting just those basics right. And then I want us to scale up to say, how do we get books in schools, more than just workbooks, actual books where kids can read, they can take home. But also we need to get SGBs on board, because accountability in our communities is important. We've got to get the backing of communities too. Valuing the things that you are given at school, making sure that if you are entrusted with a textbook, that you've got the personal responsibility to say that I want to make sure that the next person can use it too. So it's having that partnership with parents that we're never going to do away without. We're never going to be able to escape having to have the partnerships with parents, with SGBs, with communities. I need them to understand that these things are theirs. This is the future that we are building. It's not going to be up to the teacher or the person at the district or the person at the provincial department. It's up to all of us. And changing culture, and that's why my call to action to all of you earlier was, I need your help for all of you to be ambassadors of changing this culture in our country, so that we can start having these conversations to say, no, in our communities, nathi masithi look after assets zethu. Let's look after our schools. Let's report these things. When we see people vandalizing and stealing mobile libraries that have been donated, let's report them. You cannot, if there's solar panels that have been installed in a school, then I can't see it kwamakhelwane and keep quiet. I mean, we know where that comes from. So all of these things are important. And then once we get the basics right, Ms. Mamulutaba, then, I want to start talking about technology. And unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of starting these things have to be happening concurrently, because otherwise we're getting left behind by the rest of the world, where already kids by the age of 6 are doing coding and all kinds of other things. So technology is important, but in our communities, these things are not safe. You get given a device, and children are targeted at the corner there, or Amapara go and rob them of these iPads. Now they have to be locked up at school. Now you have to have security at school. So I'm not saying these things are insurmountable, but I am acutely aware of where we need to start, so that we can start at least building momentum, so that people now can see, but government is taking this seriously, so that it means that we need to get on board as well. I want to bring them all into one room and say, here's the crisis. Here's where I would like you to redirect your resources and assistance. Because then we can start to, if we're seeing a coordination, we'll start to shift the needle. Because if corporates are doing the same thing, targeting literacy, safety in schools, NPOs and NGOs, civil societies helping us with departments and getting credible data, if all of us are focused on this, and saying this is the national crisis, then I promise you, then we can shift the needle. So I view that as what our job is. I don't know where the team is, so that's our homework. That's what our job is, coordinating everyone and articulating very clearly where the priorities are, where the crisis is. So scratching where it itches, because if we just allow everybody to do whatever it is that they feel they would like to do, then it's all good and well. But then are we really harnessing the kind of assistance and the voices in the space? We're not. Some people come, some corporates come and they say, look, we want to come and build, I don't know, things that they want to build. They say, yes, exactly. They say they want to come and build a squash court. And I'm just like, well, that's great. Excellent. I don't have a squash coach here. And, it's just going to be left, derelict. But what you can do with that money is you can help us build a library. You can help us take 3 teachers on, further training assistance. Take them through to a post-junior degree course for a year at UP or whatever the case may be, so that each one can teach one when they come back. Those are the things that we want. But it's incumbent on us as government to say, here's where it itches, where we would like your help. That's our homework and that's our job. Because people will do stuff, but if we're not redirecting their energies, we are failing you as well by not saying, here is where we need the assistance. Then Nomvuyo, where are you? I take the homework. I could have easily reached for my phone and Googled one and lied and said that's my favorite book. But I take the point, and I think your point is broad, is a broader one that you are making, that we need to immerse ourselves less about obviously we need to talk about these big complex ideas, but also let's talk about, when we talk about changing culture, is the minister reading a children's book in isiXhosa? I'm not, and I take the homework. And I will certainly make sure that I go and I find one. And one day when I'm being asked that question, I'll be able to answer it with credibility. And then the last question, Faith, yes, that is complex, particularly in a province like Gauteng, because it's not like the Western Cape or the Eastern Cape or even the Northern Cape, where it's largely Setswana. Here and there you get some Xhosa speakers. It is a hot pot of what South Africa, this is the thing about Gauteng actually that makes it wonderful. It is a hot pot of what South Africa looks like, but it does present complexities for mother tongue-based bilingual education, for instance. I think the reason why I think it's bilingual is because we also need to offer learners the choice to be able to pick a language that they're most comfortable in. And if that is English, then that's fine. But what we're not going to do and what we should not do is leave behind kids who are saying, I don't know a lick of English. And now I have to start learning science through a language I don't understand. And also the other thing is I've taken the point and my homework as well around engaging with the MEC about how then do we may not have Sesotho schools because we won't be able to fill them. We can't have Setswana schools because they won't be fully fledged, but it's about making sure that in those schools, do we have people who are proficient in those languages? Do we have educators who are proficient in the languages that may be chosen by learners? And that requires provinces to also make sure that we prioritize paying our educators and hiring educators, and that we are better at managing our money so that we're not spending money on other things that are not targeted at our two main priorities. Thank you.